The deadliest plagues did not just kill bodies. They rewrote cities, empires, and entire bloodlines. Some began with a cough, some with a flea, and one with a smell people swore came from the earth itself. The worst part is, the warning often arrived after the dying had already begun. Broad Street cholera outbreak. The last outbreak moved through empires. This one narrows to one London street, and the danger is under your feet. In 1854, Broad Street in Soho is struck by cholera with brutal speed. 127 people lose their lives in the first 3 days. More than 500 lose their lives in 10 days around a single water pump. Across London that year, the epidemic claims over 10,000 lives. Dr. John Snow does not accept bad air as the answer. He marks losses on a map, interviews families, and follows the evidence to contaminated pump water, fed by sewage leaking from a nearby cesspit. Officials remove the Broad Street pump handle. While the third cholera pandemic crosses continents, Snow proves the source can begin at one handle.
Eyam Plague Village Quarantine. Next, you are not watching a kingdom collapse. You are watching one village choose who must be saved. In Eyam, Derbyshire, the swellings are already moving from house to house when the cause becomes clear. A parcel of cloth from plague struck London, sent to tailor Alexander Hadfield. From September 1665 to November 1666, Reverend William Mompesson and Puritan minister Thomas Stanley pressed the village toward a terrible bargain. Stay inside the parish. Keep the plague from spreading. The quarantine is voluntary, but it becomes a sentence. You would see food left at Mompesson's well and the boundary stone, coins sitting in vinegar-filled holes. About 260 people die. Abraham Morton, buried on November 1st, 1666, is often named the last.
Antonine Plague. Beyond one quarantined village, a legionary barracks coughs in the heat, and Rome's problem learns to march. From 165 to 180 CE, the Antonine Plague followed Lucius Verus's eastern armies home from the Near East, through Syria and toward Aquileia, then into the roads that fed Rome. Marcus Aurelius ruled through it, not from calm marble, but from war councils and emergency levies. In 169, Lucius Verus died, and some ancient accounts tie him to the same sickness. Galen saw the body's evidence: fever, black stools, swollen throat, and a scabbed rash around the 9th day. 5 to 10 million died. Marcus filled gaps with gladiators and slaves. Soon, German war bands were pressing the Danube.
Great Plague of London. If Rome's plague strained an empire, what happens when the sickness traps a capital behind its own doors? In 1665, plague entered London and turned ordinary streets into warning signs. In St. Giles in the Fields, cases multiplied. Parish bills of mortality counted the dead week by week. Bells rang. Death carts moved through the lanes. Examiners marked infected homes with red crosses and the words, "Lord have mercy upon us," then shut the families inside. You would fear the knock as much as the fever. Samuel Pepys wrote that fear into his diary. King Charles II and his court fled to safer ground. By 1666, about 100,000 Londoners were dead, roughly a quarter of the city. London endured, but its doors remembered. Marseille Plague of 1720. In Marseille, the danger came in with a manifest. On May 25, 1720, Jean-Baptiste Chateau sailed the Grand Saint-Antoine back from the Levant, carrying goods worth about 100,000 écus for the Beaucaire fair. You would smell the harbor heat, see the bales waiting, and hear the argument. Quarantine meant delay. Delay meant loss. Marseille's health officials shortened the inspection and let cargo move before quarantine was complete. That choice carried plague off the ship and into the city. From 1720 to 1722, it burned through Marseille and Provence. Roughly 45,000 of Marseille's 90,000 residents died, and about 100,000 died across the region. Provence built the Mur de la Peste to block movement, but the wall rose after the dead were already counted. Japanese smallpox epidemic of 735 to 737. By 737, the Nara court was counting its dead at the top. Smallpox, caused by variola virus, had arrived 2 years earlier and spread through the political and temple centers of Japan. If you served the court, you would watch ranks empty, tax work stall, and ritual become policy. The powerful Fujiwara clan lost all 4 of its leading brothers: Fujiwara no Muchimato, Fusasaki, Umakai, and Maro. Their deaths shattered the family's hold on government. Across Japan, around 1 million people may have died, perhaps 25 to 35% of the population. The court answered with Buddhism on a national scale, accelerating Todaiji and the Great Buddha. After the fever passed, power itself had changed hands. Honolulu Chinatown Plague Fire. By December 1899, plague was no longer a rumor moving through Pacific ports. It was in Honolulu Chinatown. Yu Chong was a Chinese bookkeeper, sometimes recorded as Yan Chong. He was dead, and doctors soon named the disease. The Board of Health answered with fire. Infected buildings were burned, while quarantine guards sealed streets and detention camps filled. On January 20th, 1900, you would have seen smoke rise near Kaumakapili Church, then spread past the lines meant to hold it. The controlled burn escaped. Much of Chinatown went with it. The church was ruined. About 6,000 people were left homeless. The epidemic was recorded at 71 cases and 61 deaths. But the response made a second catastrophe. The fire meant to stop plague may have scattered the infected rats and fleas that carried it. Third plague pandemic. In Hong Kong in 1894, Alexander Yersin worked from a makeshift hut outside the main plague hospital, close enough to the bodies to see what others were missing. The pandemic had begun in 1855 in Yunnan, China, then followed ships to Hong Kong, India, Honolulu, San Francisco, and ports worldwide. Under the microscope, Yersin identified the bacillus behind it, Yersinia pestis. That discovery changed plague from a medieval fear into a bacteriological fact. But knowledge did not stop the counting. 12 to 15 million people died, most of them in India. You would see plague camps, fumigated ships, quarantine flags, rat-catching drives, and Chinatowns sealed off under suspicion. In San Francisco alone, confirmed cases reached 280. The next plague would travel by breath. 1918, influenza pandemic. On a troop ship packed with soldiers, one cough could start a chain that ended in a grave. From 1918 to 1920, influenza A-H1N1 rode the war network, crossing oceans in troop transports and erupting inside barracks, hospitals, and crowded cities. The CDC estimates at least 50 million deaths worldwide, including about 675,000 in the United States. The pattern stunned doctors. Instead of the usual toll on infants and the elderly, the death curve bent into a W shape, with adults from 20 to 40 dying at anomalous rates. In Philadelphia, officials allowed the Liberty Loan Parade on September 28, 1918. Within days, hospitals overflowed. Within weeks, thousands were dead. You would see gauze masks, armories packed with beds, and coffins waiting outside undertakers. The war ended. The virus kept moving. 1520. Smallpox epidemic in Tenochtitlan. If the last virus outran armies, what happens when a new one reaches an empire at the exact moment its enemies close in? Around 1520, the variola virus entered the Spanish conquest of Mexico and struck the Aztec Empire. Above all, Tenochtitlan, the island capital in Lake Texcoco, now Mexico City. It moved through households with no immunity, leaving sick families without anyone well enough to bring water, while the causeways became military lifelines and traps. The toll is uncertain, but common estimates run into the millions, and some lists give 5 to 8 million lives lost across Mexico. The crisis reached the throne itself, as Cuitlahuac, successor to Moctezuma II, reportedly passed away from smallpox. Hernán Cortés exploited the fracture. Disease did not simply follow conquest here, it helped open the gates, and the next shadow will cover continent. Black Death. After one plague, the next catastrophe comes in on the tide. In Messina, Sicily, in 1347, merchant ships from Genoese trading ports slide into harbor with sick crews, dying rats, and fleas carrying Yersinia pestis. You smell warehouse rot, watch cargo unload, and misunderstand the danger until fever is already moving street to street. Kaffa in Crimea sits behind the story, tied to a siege account of infected bodies hurled over walls, though historians still argue the details. From Crimea and Mediterranean ports, the Black Death surges through Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia by 1353. Europe loses more than 50 million. Wider estimates climb from 75 to 200 million. In Lübeck, the Totentanz gives the verdict. Every rank dragged into the same procession. Cocoliztli epidemics. Beyond Europe's bone-cold procession, the air in highland Mexico turns hot, dusty, and metallic with fear. In New Spain, especially central Mexico, Cocoliztli, Nahuatl for pestilence, struck indigenous communities in waves that still resist a final diagnosis. The first great catastrophe ran from 1545 to 1548, then another from 1576 to 1578, with some records extending it to 1580. CDC-associated research estimates 5 to 15 million people lost their lives in the first wave, possibly up to 80% of native populations in affected areas. Witnesses described high fever, severe thirst, vertigo, jaundice-like signs, dark urine, blackened tongue, delirium, and bleeding from the nose and ears. Tree rings point to mega drought followed by heavy rains. And ancient DNA has raised Salmonella enterica paratyphi C as one suspect. The Black Death remade continents, but Cocoliztli nearly erased a world while leaving its culprit unnamed.